Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Parsha Pearls. This week, we're going to be looking at the portion of Teruma. An Irish construction company sent two of its workers to Wicks to obtain wood. The Irish workers walk in. We need some 4x2s. The clerk looks, he goes, you mean 2x4s, don't you? One of the workers says, hang on, I'm going to call my foreman. He comes back in, yep, I meant 2x4. And the guy says, okay, how long do you need them? The other worker says, I'll call the foreman again. He comes back, says, a really long time. We're building a house with them. Today begins what many might regard as the particularly boring Torah portions. Let's be frank. It seems to be that's pretty much what they are, because for the next 500 verses, we're given intricate details about the building of a sanctuary, the artifacts, the priestly garb, and so forth. Now, the sanctuary is the forerunner of the temples, of course, and that stood as the focal point in Jewish life and existence. In fact, the sanctuary was the forerunner, if you will, of all existent synagogues and houses of worship. Still, you have to ask, why do we need 5 portions discussing the making of a sanctuary? I can understand maybe 1, maybe 2, but doesn't God have mercy on the average shul goer who has to sit through the drone of this stuff for the next month? That's what we might argue if we're going to be a little bit sacrilegious. But on real reflection and further consideration, I suggest to you the following. Have you ever considered how we use the term building in so many different contexts? We talk about building homes, we talk about building families, we talk about building a career, building a community. The notion of building, of construction, it's not just limited to bricks and mortar, but indeed to multiple dimensions of our daily living. And maybe that's the deeper message in the detailed construction of the sanctuary at this particular juncture of the journey of the fledgling Jewish nation. After all, why does God really care how many curtains there are, how long they were, what color they had to be? The Jewish people are building a new life, a new identity, a whole new purpose and structure in their lives. There are therefore implicit messages contained within each dimension of the sanctuary from which they could derive and we could derive and apply vital lessons. You know, the Medrash tells us that reading and studying the laws of building the sanctuary is the equivalent of building it. How does reading about something compensate for the practical application? Imagine if I could just sit and read about Shabbos or Pesach rather than going through the motions. And yet therein lays the biggest indication that in regard to the sanctuary, it wasn't just about the viable detail, but every bit the bigger picture and the lessons gleaned therefrom. So if you read and study them and you derive the appropriate life program, it's as good and as meaningful as though you built it, because that was really the underlying purpose of building it. And that's why the Torah needs to elaborate in so much detail, because of the vast amount of life lessons that we can actually glean from it. So let's now consider, what are some of the lessons that we can learn from the sanctuary? Well, let's take the ark, for example. It was made up of broken measurements, 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits. Why all this broken measurements, 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5? The ark symbolizes spiritual aspiration. A home, family life, as much as personal life, and yes, community life, has to always be underpinned by spirituality. Is there anyone who can ever lay claim to being perfect in the spiritual arena? There's always room for progress, for further growth, for more development. The rabbis direct us to always look towards somebody more spiritual than we are, to set a benchmark where we're motivated to strive ever upward. In fact, it's the one form of jealousy that is religiously sanctioned, because it generates moral improvement. So I'm jealous of the other person who's more spiritual than me. That's okay. Hence, the dimensions are made up of broken measurements, these dimensions of the ark, implying incompletion, the need to constantly aim ever higher towards that unattainable level of perfection. In contrast, when you find the table with the showbread, as it was contained in the sanctuary, it was made up of some whole measurements and some broken measurements. One side had to be 2 by 1 by 1.5, and then another area had to be upwards and sideways and this way. The other one was 2 by 2. The table represents man's material pursuits and aspirations, and the very foundations upon which this has to be built. The broken measurement, that was the height of the table. Again, symbolizing the notion of attainment. There's nothing wrong with being ambitious as long as you focus and your energy is channeled in the right direction. Are you accumulating just for the sake of having more? There's something wrong about more than enough. When we have more, it's never enough. It's always somewhere just out there, just out of reach. The more we acquire, the more elusive enough becomes. Hence, the width and the length of a table were whole numbers to remind us that everything material has limits and parameters. Don't lose perspective. See them for what they are worth. Feel yourself as being complete. Appreciate what you have. Be cognizant of your blessings and of what's truly important in life. And then there's the altar, which was entirely whole measurements, 1 by 1 by 2. The altar, of course, represents sacrifice. In life, you only sacrifice for those things that you truly value and believe in, be it your faith, your loved ones, or whatever is deeply embedded in your soul. The whole dimensions of the altar reminds us that in a world that is filled with causes for worry and anxiety, even as all of us are confused and ambivalent at times where we don't know the answer or are perplexed by what's going on out there, then instead of giving up, instead of drowning in doubt, we hold it together. We remain complete and steadfast in our determination to ride the rapids and see it through. If you believe in this person or this relationship or this cause or your role in your slice of the world, then you fight for it to the nth degree. Even as things sometimes don't seem to go to plan, rather again than deviating from your path of sincerely held convictions or of soul growth, then you have to forge ahead, all the while having faith that everything will unfold in the right manner. And finally, there is the menorah. The menorah had no measurements whatsoever in respect to its construction. The menorah was just having to be carved out of a piece of gold, but there wasn't specific reference to how tall, etc. But the menorah represents light, and it signifies our responsibility to engender illumination throughout. What was the first thing God created in the world? It was light. And behold, he saw it was good. The last thing God created in this world was man, who now has an ongoing responsibility to take that light and generate it throughout. You are my light means you light up my soul. You bring brilliance into my life. You cast a shine into the world. Tradition, in fact, tells us that the menorah came about by way of miracle. Moshe didn't make it. The artisans didn't make it. God somehow brought it into being. It's not that Moses couldn't grasp the architectural skill involved. What he failed to comprehend was why the 7 branches and 49 adornments were meant to be hammered from a single bar of gold. The idea that plurality and singularity can be wed defies human logic, and yet therein lies the challenge for every one of us. The responsibility to create light, to brighten your slice of the world. It's all transcendent. Whether it appeals to our sensibilities or not, the obligation is incumbent, it's perpetual, it's infinite. Now, whom, you might ask, should be worthy and deserving to contribute to this sacred structure in the desert? Which people could be tasked with such a holy challenge? You'd think and wonder to yourself that ultimately it should be limited and restricted for the lofty. Because after all, it's God's home, so to speak. And it's not just any building. It's a place on earth where God can manifest his glory. But God says, whoever so desires should contribute towards the making of this sanctuary. It's not the domain of the elite. It's not exclusive to any specific group type. Says God, whoever wants, whoever feels it in their hearts, whoever is moved enough to make their contribution, to make their difference, to aid and to help build, can come along and do so. The message is clear and it's paramount. If everyone can get involved in the making of a holy abode for God, it means that we all have the ability to build. Each of us has the capability to construct a world around us, the kind of world that God wants, a place where, as in the sanctuary itself, he would feel at home. There's a story told in the Tanakh, in the Bible, how after a very rich and productive life, the most famous prophet Elijah was about to leave from this world, and he went walking with his favorite disciple and successor, the prophet Elisha. Says the verse, they were walking and talking and walking. You have to wonder what they must have been talking about. What do you say in such a moment? There's no time left for small talk. What subject is worthy of such a fraught final conversation between two such lofty spiritual giants? The Talmud elucidates, and the Talmud tells us one part of the conversation was a discussion about creating a new world. What does that mean? The two prophets were looking at the very world before them, the world that Elijah was about to leave and the one that Elisha was going to now be facing. They saw what we observe in our own times, a world of violence, terror, injustice, suppression. They saw conflicts between Egyptians and Assyrians and Philistines. And as they were contemplating these events, they discussed how Elisha might best face his new world and what he had to do in order to build a more civil and harmonious society. Now, Elisha is one man, soon to assume a new responsibility. The task before him is overwhelming, but Elijah is telling him what each of us is called upon to do. It's not enough to engage in constructing your own life. You have to, at the same time, be concerned with building the world around you, making it a home for the divine presence, a place of justice, of compassion, of human dignity. So the instruction at the time of making the sanctuary wasn't something limited to a certain time and place. It's an ongoing call to action for every single one of us. Whoever wants to contribute. In other words, look into your own heart and determine what is your contribution. What are you doing to make the world the better place it was meant to be? I tell a story of a very old Jewish man of German descent who fell ill in his hometown of Berlin just a number of years ago, and he asked that his rabbi be called to his bedside. Rabbi, there's something I need to get off my chest. Towards the end of World War II, I took pity on a German soldier and I gave him refuge in my garden shed. The rabbi looked at him and said, even in the circumstances, one of the hallmarks of a Jew is compassion and amity. You demonstrated that in the most difficult of circumstances. It's fine. But Rabbi, I also made him pay me 100 Deutschmarks for every week that he stayed. The rabbi looks to him, you were hiding him. You were risking your life for him. You're entitled to some compensation. He says, thank you, Rabbi. That really, really, truly eases my mind. Just one more thing, Rabbi. He says, sure, what is it? He goes, you think I need to go tell him still before I die that the war is over? There's a war being fought out there. God put you and me into this world to grapple with it, to take on your slice of the world, to battle against the whims and dictates of such a laissez-faire and liberal society and transform it for the better, for good, forever. Who exactly reserves the right to tell us the war is over? In which book, Bible, or life manual does it declare that at some point in your life, you're no longer able to make a difference, or that you simply have to hang up your gloves? You no longer have to apply yourself anymore. Build for me a sanctuary, says God. Everybody can participate in that ritual. Everyone can help make that happen. Let no one think, who am I and what am I to have such tremendous powers of building? Don't perceive yourself in terms of your constraints as a mortal being. Yes, there are times that a call for transcendent action is upon us. We have to at times do more than we think we possibly can, because every one of us is endowed with added spiritual energy and the power to transcend mortal constraints. People say you can't make a difference, you can't change the system. Don't pay attention to dream killers. They are afraid of their own dreams and they're cowardly. We're greater than that. Every single one of us is greater than that. So step outside of yourself, recognize the greatness that is within you. When God says, go ahead and build for me a sanctuary, every one of you can get involved. What God is saying is that there's greatness inside every single one of us. And when we recognize and see that greatness, we will come to discover our own power.